Hello everyone, my name is Mr. Casey, and today's lesson will be studying from Unit 8, Art and Soul. What do we learn about people from their artful expressions? So here's what we will cover in the lesson today. We will talk about describing ways we use art to express ourselves. And what does that mean, to express ourselves? We will learn to use text features to improve writing and reading skills. We will use figurative language to make writing and reading more expressive. And yes, we will explain what figurative language means. And we will practice writing about how you express yourself. So let's get started. First, last week, we read an article, a science article called Volcano. And I asked you to go back and read the pages about the explosion or eruption of Mount St. Helens and ask what was the viewpoint of the people who experienced this eruption. So if we read this page, is there some sort of clue that tells us their viewpoint? What did they think? What did they experience? Okay. If we look at this page, here's the answer. The people there will not forget what happened, though. Okay, it's something that they will always remember. I was there, and I remember, and I will always remember that day when the volcano exploded. It was close to my home. Okay, so that's the viewpoint of the people that experienced the eruption. So today we'll start on page 474 in your book. The unit is called Art and Soul. And here's the question for this unit. What do we learn from people, about people from their artful expressions? So the first question we should ask, what does the verb to express mean? The answer, express, is to put a thought into words or action, or to show an opinion or feeling in a creative way. Now, the next question we should ask, are there different ways that people express themselves? Well, of course, there are many different ways for artful expression or creative expression. We can draw, we can paint, we can sing, we can dance, we can play, we can design, we can act, we can speak. Some people code. There are lots of different ways that people are creative and express themselves. So there are many different forms of artful expression, and they are as different as we are different. So we'll talk about some of those today. First, how do we use text features to improve our writing? This is page 476 in your book. Okay, so text features in fiction and nonfiction. Before we start reading this, first we should ask, what's the difference between fiction and nonfiction? Do you know? So here's the answer. In most writing, fiction refers to plot, settings, and characters created from the imagination in our mind. Nonfiction is factual stories. These are true, okay, focused on actual events and people. So most of the time, when we talk about fiction, we talk about imagination or creative writing. Nonfiction is true. It's facts. Okay, so now let's go back over here. So text features, what are they? Writers use text features in fiction and nonfiction to show information in a different way. They select the best features to add to the writing to help readers better understand the text. For example, many writers use photos, illustrations, diagrams, and charts to show information in a visual way. That's one kind of text feature. So how does it work? So before you read, we look at the text features to see how the text is organized. And then as you read, you use the features to help you guide through the text. Okay, we will practice this today. Text features in fiction. The titles of the stories and novels often tell what the story is about. We use paragraphs to separate ideas into understandable parts. Fiction often has illustrations or drawings which help people visualize the characters and events. So what about nonfiction? There are also text features we use in nonfiction. Okay? We have titles and paragraphs to break up the information into smaller pieces that are easier to read. They often have other kind of text features like headings, photos, and captions in this nonfiction text. And think about how this information adds to your understanding. Okay? So now we'll look at a text and try and figure out what are the text features they use to make this text easier to read. Okay, so our first question is, does the writing use titles? Well, of course it does. The title is here, Origami. So we know before we read what we're going to read about. Okay? It also uses subtitles or subheadings. So we have origami as the main title, and then we have origami as art, origami as science. So that helps us understand what these different ideas are. Does it use paragraphs? Yes, there are 3 different paragraphs. Okay, the first one is an overview of origami. The second one tells us about origami as an art. The third one tells us about origami as a science. Does it have an illustration? Yes. Over here, of course, we have an example of origami, so we know what it is before we even read. We understand what it is that we're reading about. And is this fiction or nonfiction writing? What do you think? I think that this is real. This is fact. Okay, so origami is a real thing, so this is nonfiction. Okay, let's try one more time. This is in page 476, 477 in your book. So I want you to take 2 minutes, pause the video, read this narrative, and then look for the text features that we just talked about. Okay, ready? First, does the writing use titles? Of course. What is it about? It's about Louis Armstrong. Okay. Does it have subtitles? Yes. First one is Early Days, and the next one is New Jazz. Does that tell us what we're going to be reading about? Of course it does. Okay. Before we even read the narrative, we know that Louis Armstrong is probably a jazz artist. And once we read the narrative, we know that that's true. So that's why we use these text features to give us clues as to what we're going to be reading about. The next one, does it use paragraphs? Of course, there are 2 different paragraphs here, Early Days and then New Jazz. Okay. Does it use illustrations? Yes. This doesn't have a picture of Louis Armstrong, but it does show a timeline that tells us what happened during his life. So in 1901, he was born. In 1930, he begins touring the United States as a jazz musician. So this tells us something about his life without having to read the text. Okay. And is this fiction or nonfiction? Louis Armstrong is a real person, so this is nonfiction. Let's try one more. So again, take 2 minutes, pause the video, read this narrative, and then look for the text features that are in the narrative. Okay, ready? First one, does the writing use titles? Of course. What is it about? It's about public expression. So what does that mean, public expression? How do we express ourselves? Right? We already talked about that, but doing it in a public way, not home in a private way. Okay? And then we have subtitles, painting on walls, and murals. Okay, so that tells us what the writing is about. Does it have paragraphs? Yes. This breaks up the writing and makes it easier to read, and also allows for different ideas inside of the narrative. Okay, so the first one is about graffiti. The second one is about murals. Does it have illustrations? Yes. Here's a picture of a beautiful mural in downtown Philadelphia. Okay. And is this fiction or nonfiction? Again, this is about a real thing, okay, about a real situation in a city in America. Okay, so this is nonfiction. So here is a task for you. Okay. I want you to write a short nonfiction narrative about your hometown where you live. And I want you to use all of the text features that we talked about to improve the organization and understanding of your writing. Okay? The text features help reading and writing. Okay? So I want you to take maybe 5 minutes, okay? Pause the video and get out your notebook and write a short narrative about your hometown. Okay, let me show you an example of one that I wrote about my hometown. Okay, and we'll see if I use the text features that we talked about. So here is my example. Saigon, my new home. Although I was born in America, I have lived in Saigon, the largest city in Vietnam, for almost 7 years. Many people are amazed that I live in a place so far from where I grew up. I traveled here on holiday in 2013 and fell in love with the city and the culture of Vietnam. Change can be hard. There are many things to love about my new city, including the wonderful food and the friendly people. But Saigon is a huge city compared to my small hometown. Sometimes the crazy traffic and constant noise are annoying. There are also lots of strange smells that are hard to get used to, like fish sauce and durian. Okay, so does my example use titles? Yes. We see 2 titles here. One, Saigon, my new home. So you know that I'm talking about Saigon. And I also talk about change can be hard. Okay, paragraphs. Yes, there are 2 different paragraphs to break up the writing. Illustrations. I show you a picture of my hometown in America and then my new home in Saigon. Okay, and is this fiction or nonfiction? This is real. This is a real story about me and my town. So this is nonfiction. Okay, now we're going to talk about using figurative language to improve writing and speaking. This is page 478 and 479. Okay, so go beyond the literal meaning. So here we talk about writers choose their words carefully. We use figurative language, words and phrases that have meanings outside of what the words mean by themselves. Figurative language includes idioms, metaphors, and connotative meanings. And yes, we will explain all of those right now. First, an idiom is a group of words that together communicate a different meaning than what the words mean by themselves. Here's an example. David is out of shape. If we say David is out of shape, that group of words, out of shape, means David needs to exercise. Maybe he's fat, okay? Out of shape. Those 3 words together mean something different than the words that you see in the dictionary. This is called an idiom. The next one is a metaphor. A metaphor compares 2 things that are unlike. Okay? We often say that one thing is the other. For example, your hand is an ice cube. Now, if I say your hand is an ice cube, is your hand really an ice cube? Of course not. Okay, your hand is an ice cube means your hand is cold, very cold, like ice. Okay, so we're comparing 2 things that are not the same, a hand and ice. And here's one more piece of figurative language. A connotative meaning is what a word implies or suggests. Okay, similar words communicate different meanings. Connotations can emphasize ideas or emotions. For example, using the word excited instead of happy gives a better idea of how a person might feel. Okay? It's more descriptive language. And the more descriptive our language, the better our writing and speaking skills are. Okay? We talked here about the word imply. What does that mean? To imply is to say something without really saying it, to suggest an idea that is not stated directly. And then literal, go beyond the literal meaning here. Literal is taking words in their usual or most basic sense without metaphor or allegory. So we can have a literal meaning, ice cube. Okay, an ice cube is a thing, so that's the literal meaning if I talk about an ice cube. If I say your hand is an ice cube, I am implying that your hand is cold. Okay, so how does this work? So we can use context to understand unknown phrases and figures of speech. The example here, Tish can be loud. She often shouts at the top of her lungs. Now, top of her lungs doesn't really mean anything, but can we look at the sentences nearby and see if they give clues? Are there any clues? Well, the word loud, the word shout, okay? Predict a literal meaning that might fit in the context, the top of her lungs. Okay, and then reread the sentence to see if your definition makes sense. So we have a clue here, loud, and we have shouts. Okay, so shouts at the top of her lungs means to speak very, 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 very loudly. Okay, here's two more examples, okay, of figurative language. So let's take 1 minute and read this. My friend's father is a talented gardener. People say that he has a green thumb. He certainly can make plants thrive. Every year he enters the garden show. This year his entry stole the spotlight. It won first prize. It was so amazing. Okay, so what we want to focus on here is this one. He has a green thumb. What does that mean? Does he actually have a thumb that is the color green? I don't think so. What is this narrative about? It's about gardening. Okay, we know that, right? And then gardening, most plants are green. So, right, if it says that he is a talented gardener, it emphasizes how well he guards. It sounds like having a green thumb means he is a good gardener. That meaning makes sense. Okay, so we have clues from the narrative itself that helps us understand the figurative language. He has a green thumb. Okay, so here's some practice. Okay, here is a narrative, and that underlined, we see some figurative language. Okay, so what I want you to do is pause the video for 3 minutes, read the passage, and write down what you think is the definition of the figurative language in Develop Your Talent. Okay, ready? So, did you look at the sentences nearby and see if they give clues? Did you predict a literal meaning that might fit in the context? And did you reread the sentence to see if your definition makes sense? Let's see how you did. The first one, piece of cake. A piece of cake is something that is easy to do. Now, how do we know that? We're talking about people being good at things, and people have talent. So people who are talented naturally at something may be really good at them. Okay, so skateboarding might be a piece of cake or easy to do for some people. For me, it's very difficult. The next one, think outside the box. To think outside the box is to be creative, to have different ideas. If we're in the box, then we do things one way. To be outside the box is to think differently. Okay, the next one is feed and water it. So once you find your talent, you have to feed and water it. Now, is there a clue here? Of course, this next word right here, by practicing often, tells us the meaning of this idiom, feed and water it, to develop a skill by practice. Okay. The next one, hard to swallow. Sometimes that can be hard to swallow. This is something that we don't like or enjoy, something we don't want to do. Practice can be very hard. And then the last one, you can pat yourself on the back. Okay. There is a literal meaning, pat myself on the back, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about to celebrate yourself, to be excited about something that you did. Okay, so this is figurative language. Next, let's practice. How do you express yourself? Okay, you can see over here, artists express their ideas and feelings through their art. They also express their culture. Look at how we use artful expressions from around the world. How do you express yourself? Again, all of us express ourselves in different ways. So, what I want you to do is stop the video for 10 minutes and write a 2-paragraph nonfiction narrative to describe how you express yourself. make sure you use the text features that we talked about earlier to improve your writing, titles, paragraphs, illustrations, and then also use figurative language to make the writing more expressive and interesting to the reader. Okay, so I'll give you 10 minutes to stop the video and do this task. Okay, everyone ready? Did you write your narrative? Did you include text features to improve the writing, titles, paragraphs, illustrations? Did you use figurative language to make it more expressive and interesting? And once we read this, will we understand how you express yourself? Here's an example that I did for you. Okay. Time to cook. Even though I'm normally running like a chicken with its head cut off because of work and studies, I try to make time to be creative in the kitchen. Cooking helps me to relax, to focus my mind, and get rid of everyday stress. Shopping is the hard part. I love to cook, but I hate to shop. For me, the local markets are crowded, noisy, and stinky. And when it's raining cats and dogs, it can be so difficult to get my shopping done. But it's all worth it when I get to sit down with my family and enjoy the fruits of my labor. Okay, so in my narrative about how I express myself, do you understand how I express myself? Yes, of course, it's in the title, Time to Cook. So I love to cook. That's how I express myself creatively in the kitchen. Okay. Now, did I use a subtitle? Yes, shopping is the hard part. So we know I like to cook, but I don't like to shop. Okay. Now, did I use paragraphs? Yes, there's 2 different paragraphs so that the writing is broken up into different ideas. Did I use illustrations? Yes, you see pictures here at the bottom. And did I use figurative language? Yes, I used figurative language and I used the pictures to help you understand the figurative language. So the first one, running like a chicken with its head cut off. Now, am I a chicken with my head cut off? No. This illustration here shows what it means. What is the meaning of the idiom, running like a chicken with its head cut off? Trying to do so many things at one time. The second one, raining cats and dogs. Does it really rain like cats and dogs in Vietnam? Of course, no. But you can see a picture here. When we talk about raining cats and dogs is when it's raining really, really heavily, which we have happen very, very often in our city. And the third one, fruits of my labor, means enjoying what I have done. Okay? In the last example, we talked about pat yourself on the back. For me, the fruits of my labor is the food that I get to eat once I've finished cooking in the kitchen. Okay, here's your homework for this week. So read the passage right here, The Cure, okay, and write down the meaning of the underlined figurative language. See if you can understand what those mean. And then the second one, another writing. Write a short paragraph about your experiences over the last 3 months and use the text features and figurative language tools we learned today to improve your writing. So write about your experiences, positive or negative, over the last 3 months being at home and explain that to us. Thank you very much, and we will see you next time.